My name's Lycia Heath. I'm the CEO of Women for Election, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Selena Uibo as our In Conversation guest today. I would like to acknowledge that today I am coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge First Nations women joining us on this call today. And also note that it's my personal belief that until we reach Makarrata or treaty with First Nations people in this country, then our ability to move forward together in harmony is compromised. It's so wonderful to have the leader of the ALP in the Northern Territory joining us today, Selena, which makes you the leader of the opposition in the NT as well. So as the member for Arnhem. And I think what we really want to focus on today, like we do every month with our In Conversation sessions, is about your personal journey into politics and, why you want to see, more women and greater diverse voices in our political chambers, be it in council or territory or state or federal parliament. So with that, and we're a relatively small group, so we will have the opportunity to ask questions as well. But a big welcome to you, Selena. And my very first place to start is, believe it or not, before politics. Like, everyone's journey is different, and everyone's moment about why they wanted to get involved in politics is different too. But tell us a little bit about what you were doing, in your schooling and then in your career before politics was even part of your thinking.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucia and Lindsay, for the invitation to speak with people today. It's such an exciting opportunity to encourage more women in politics or support women thinking about politics. I'm in Katherine in the Northern Territory, so it is under native title at the moment. It's contested lands of the Jawoyn, Duggaman and Wadawurrung people, so acknowledging that's where I'm coming from today for the In Conversations session. My background, so growing up here in the Northern Territory, both my parents were teachers. So I guess we kind of say, have a bit of a running joke in my family that four of us, immediate family, were teachers, and long history for both of my parents in education. And so before politics, the, I guess, deep-rooted value from my family was around education and the strength of education, and knowledge is power. And it wasn't ever anything forced on me. It's just something that kind of grew from just having the family experience and always having, I guess, the support to attend school, and also sometimes the push, when you're with teenage years, but always feeling supported from the home front around learning and how important and valuable learning is. So that's sort of what led me into my role before politics as, I guess, my first professional career. So I studied education at the University of Queensland, moved away from the NT just to have a little bit of a change of scene. And when you live in the NT, it's 2 degrees of separation, so not 6. So everybody knows everybody's business. I just sort of needed a bit of a change. And I was successful to get into the University of Queensland. And it was sort of like a bigger version of Darwin, Brisbane at the time, all those years ago. So it became quite comfortable being there, but also new and exciting as well. And I still had an interest at the university level in politics because I did youth parliament. It was a great program arranged by the YMCA here in the Northern Territory, and it's run in different iterations across Australia for young people. So I was supported through an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander group called ATAP, the Aboriginal Islander Tertiary Aspirations Program, for my first year of youth parliament when I was a grade 10, and continued that when I went to senior school in year 11 and 12. So sort of that mix of journey of interest early in politics, but the passion and the values of education kind of formatted, I guess, the stepping stones for me in my journey into politics over many, many years to where I am now. So that's hopefully not too long-winded for
No,
you,
no, not
Lucia.
at all. Because it's so fascinating, and personally, more teachers and principals in politics is something that I'm a big yes for. But not just graduate. You graduated valedictorian from UQ, is that right?
Yes,
In
yes,
your Yeah, so don't want to underplay that either, but but equally the youth parliament and the different exposure that you got to politics along the way, I think is something that we are very pro. Like the more support, the more exposure along the way, the more informed and I guess the more inspired you can be to get involved as well. So I heard that in your case. Well, so so teaching, moved back to the NT. I mean, you're the leader of the ALP in the Northern Territory now, Selena, but were you a member of the ALP when you were at university? Did that come later in life? Like what was the trigger? Because you ultimately ran in 2016, but sometimes there's a flashpoint I see that something particular happens. Was that the case for you, or was it more, you know, granular for you?
Yeah, and I've sort of think about my journey around that this year. And so when I moved, so I wasn't part of any political parties at uni or, young age or anything like that. But I think from my family's perspective, we never sort of talked specifically about, labor. And I think, it was just sort of that kind of undertone of our labor values as a family. So it's something I paid more attention to when I was at uni. But when I graduated finally, so I did start at my university, did a couple of years, sort of got a little bit off track, decided to put the university on hold, worked and traveled, got a lot more experience. And I went back to Numbulwar to do some tutoring in the school there. And that's the community where my mother's from, on the southeast Arnhem Land coast of the Northern Territory in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And it was the 6 weeks of tutoring in Numbulwar that sort of um, made me think more about returning back to my studies to finish school, to finish university so I could go and teach in school. And it was that kind of realization of being with family in Numbulwar and going, actually, I do want to be a teacher. I do want to go back and finish my degree. So went back and finished. I think I had a year and a half left of uni, graduated as valedictorian, which was a huge honour, with the goal of returning back to the Northern Territory from Queensland to then go and teach at Numbulwar. So my first year of teaching, I was in Darwin, funnily at my old senior college. So 9 years later, there were teachers there who were my teachers when I was
Still there?
a student as well. So it's kind of like looking behind the curtain and, seeing what teachers do in the staff room, what, students don't really care about. But so I was very supported there, and I joined the Australian Education Union Northern Territory branch. So that was really important. I got some great support with them when a few things happened as a first year teacher. So I guess I started having a bit more awareness of what's the union movement about, paying attention to what political party was in at the Northern Territory and what changes they made, to then think about what the on the ground impact would be for me as a first year teacher. And I was with some very well versed and experienced teachers and union members. So I was learning a lot in that first year, which looking back on now, I didn't realize I was learning so much at the time. My goal was to go and teach out at Numbulwar, and I kept hassling the principal who was there saying, give me a job. And he kept offering me primary school. I was high school trained. And then at the end of the year, he said, we've got a job in the secondary. Do you want to come out to Numbulwar? I said, yes, great. So moved out to Numbulwar to live and teach out there, which was my goal. And going back to Numbulwar as like in a professional capacity. So I was in my early 30s, and always been out there with family and visited and seen things that have happened over time that made the community better, and things that just, to me, go, well, why is the road still unsealed? Why do we still have, bridges that aren't built over certain sections of the road that mean that the community's isolated for 4 to 5 months? of the year because of the wet season. So all of this started to swirl in my mind a bit when I was living out at Numbua, and lack of services in remote capacity. So I love teaching and I love working with the young people in my secondary class, my senior secondary, and then middle years as well. And I started to think, what other ways can I support affecting change that goes beyond the classroom? And that really kind of drew back on the interest in politics. And I'd seen the then Labor opposition leader in Darwin. I think I was having lunch with my sister in the city on the school holidays, and I beeline for her and I'd said, "Oh, I'm thinking maybe one day to run in politics. Do you have any advice?" And poor thing got her caught at the end of her lunch, and she was pretty good. And she said, "Oh, I think she kind of might have asked, oh, where's your interests, your values lie?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a Labor voter, but I'm not a member of the party." And it was about I think 20, oh, what year? Oh, it's all a blur anyway. Many, many years ago. But it was a couple of years before, it was a year or so before I'd actually joined the party, before I ran. So 2 years before I ran. And I had spoken to her, and she gave me her chief of staff's contact details and said, "I'll just talk to him and, see how you go." So a man I'd never met, and later on became a really big mentor for me in the party and also as a colleague at Parliament. But I spoke to him for about half an hour on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon when I was at Numbua, and spoke about what my values were. And he said, "Oh, well, this is the reason why I joined Labor. And the advice that I give people, this is my mentor speaking." He said, "You can be as active or as passive as you want. You can join the party, pay your fee, know that your money's going towards the values that you have in that party, and then that's it." There's other people who, run as candidates, run as, put themselves up as staff members, door knock, letterbox,
Yeah.
campaign, volunteer, support the party, fundraise. So it gave me kind of everything. So from, the least you can do as a party member to the most. And so I was that really struck me as quite good advice, because it wasn't forceful, it wasn't, righteous. It was very down to earth and
There's
very,
something for everyone.
yeah. So it meant that you could, even if you weren't sure, like you knew you were Labor. For me, I knew I was Labor, but I wasn't quite sure what my journey would be within, Labor Party. Thinking if I'm interested to run one day, I have to take the first step. People say, if you want to become a doctor, what's the first step? Buy a pen or a pencil so you can start writing your form. Well, I guess it's it's
Yeah.
all online now. That's a little bit old. But first thing is to apply. So what is it they can do? So if I want to run, what are the steps that I need to take backwards? So that's kind of how I looked at it at the time. After that conversation with him, I joined the party. And because there wasn't really a remote branch in my area, I'd phone into some of the meetings, which were my closest branch, which was Nhulunbuy Yirrkala Labor branch, which was many, many hundreds of kilometres up the coast from Numbua. But through that, I met one of the former members of Parliament who really supported me and mentored me and encouraged me actually to put my
Wow.
expression of interest in, to run for the seat of Arnhem eventually. So that was sort of the journey in a bit of a speeded version.
Thank you. I think and again, love your personal journey, but that piece between teaching and then teachers union and then noticing infrastructure, and my personal favorite, chasing someone down at lunch, which just, because we love that ambition at Women for Election. Sometimes it takes people getting tapped on the shoulder, and sometimes it's chasing down someone at lunch. But I think what I really wanted to focus on was you weren't a member of the party for a decade. So if I've got my chronology right there, you were a member 1 to 2 years before you ran.
Yes.
And that's because sometimes in our different training that we run across the country, people express regret. I've missed the opportunity. I wish, because I haven't been a member of the party, and so we like to demonstrate, and you've gone from elected to cabinet, to leader, we like to really emphasize that it's different now from how it might have been a few decades ago, so that you can join a party, some extreme cases, 6 weeks before you run, but also a year before you run. So, and you got elected the first time you ran, is that right, Selena?
Yes, so I ran in 2016 and I was very fortunate because I had time off from teaching. So I pretty much had a straight full 8 months of campaigning until the territory election, which is always in
Ah.
August of the NT general election year.
And you won the first time you ran. Again, that's not the typical experience. Often we prepare our alumni that it can take 2 or 3 times to get elected, but I was looking at the numbers. You thoroughly won. Let's say that there wasn't even a distribution of preferences that was required. Am I right with that?
Yes. So the first election in 2016 was a very convincing win. In 2020 was a lot more difficult, and that one did come down to preferences, and that was very nerve-wracking.
Right. Well, we might unpick that a little bit in a moment, but I think so let's then go to that period. You've been elected, you're the new member of Arnhem. What was that experience of that kind of first term, and what was the time period between you being a completely new member to then getting, you know, decent responsibilities in terms of portfolios? Tell us about that process.
Yeah, so it was very surreal. I remember getting the keys to the electorate office here in Catherine. My Arnhem office is based in Catherine, and sitting at the front reception because I had no staff, and I was sort of swiddling around in the chair going, oh my God, what do I do now?
Oh my
There's no like handbook or guide on to be a local member. And I was like, okay, we need to get some staff. What do I do? How do I recruit someone who I don't even know? I can tell what the job is. So it was a little bit of flying blind at the start. A bit of time spent in Darwin just getting process things. My colleague Chancey Pake and I were sort of both out of towners who spent a bit of time together, both young, first time elected as well, both representing very large bush electorates. So we spent like I think 2 or 3 days getting lost in Parliament, and it's a huge little maze for us, even though our Parliament's tiny. So
Funny.
I know every door and everything now because I got lost for that first week. But got a work card, signed the contract, asked about what do I do for recruiting of staff, and got all of that admin advice from the parliamentary team in Darwin, not the political team, but the Parliament staff. And then set about sort of looking back at what things have people raised with me in the 8 months of campaigning. How do I start to voice those concerns, ideas, questions, suggestions, etc. And got a great first time electorate officer, and she came in for an interview. It was great. She said, "Oh, I've never done this work before," and I said, "Don't worry, I haven't either. We can learn together."
Love
And
it.
she was a single mom with a young kid, and she said, "I'm not sure about the work travel," and I wasn't a mum then. I said, "No, just bring your son with us." And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, like kids are assets out bush, and people still will ask about her and her kid now, even to this day." And it was just so nice to kind of be
Lovely.
in a flexible environment, to be able to have someone who supported me in that first time role, who I was able to support with what I knew, particularly around the electorate and the constituents. So that worked out really nicely. And so it was very surreal. I was a backbencher for 2 years. So in 2016 until 2018, the middle of 2018. And then our chief minister at the time said we had 8 ministers and the territory cabinet has the capacity for 9. Officially, that's sort of the numbers. And we had won very convincingly. We had 18 of the 25 seats in the Northern Territory Parliament in 2016. That dwindled away by the end of the term, but that's another story. But the chief minister was very supportive, and he had meetings with each of us as members, and he sat people down who were, becoming ministers. And when I went in to meet with him, he said, "I want to make you the caucus chair." And I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Great. What does the caucus chair do?" And he
Mm.
rattled off a whole bunch of processes. I'm like, okay, I can do this. So, I'm a teacher, I'm a planner, I'm an organizer. I can chase kids. Hopefully, I could chase politicians into, like, whipping them into shape. And
Mm,
so I got that extra responsibility in the caucus team, which I was honoured to do, and it sort of gave me a different perspective on, the caucus size and what the caucus deals with, the caucus meetings and the travel that can occur. So that was an interesting role, and we got assistant ministry roles as well. And there were a couple, and I had education, which was a really great blessing because that was my background. But it meant that I got to work with a very experienced educator who then became the education minister at the time. So I learned a lot, and then both myself and Chancey, we became assistant ministers in Aboriginal affairs. So a sort of a top end and a central, um, splitting up the territory in the sort of two regions. So we were assistant ministers to the chief minister. So
yeah,
that also opened up a whole range of professional development,
yeah, I bet.
opportunities to represent the territory at that level, at the ministerial level, and learn at conferences and forums that were to do with those two assistant ministry roles that I took on. So I think that was a bit of almost a training ground and a breeding
Mm,
ground, and almost the same thing. You could do as little or as much as you wanted in an assistant minister role, and I really pushed to get some opportunities with the chief minister's support and the other education minister's support, where that just really grew my knowledge and my experience in that 2-year period
yeah.
before I did get the opportunity to become a minister.
Um, I think great training grounds and some great champions, it sounds like, as well along the way. And I'm sure it's not all, it's not all lightness and roses the entire experience. But a lot of learnings that make you, the more informed leader as a consequence today also. Um, so if you elected in 2016, then you've got an election in 2020, an election in 2024. So you've been the member for Arnhem now for, well, a tad over 8 years. And there's running the first time, then there's running for re-elections. So different types of election campaigns, I imagine. But tell us just a little bit about being the member for Arnhem itself. Like, um, what is it that you enjoy the most about? We're talking about being the member away from Parliament for the moment. So what is it that you enjoy the most about the role, and what is it that you're most proud of as well over those years that you have impacted on behalf of your community?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, especially now, in opposition, the difference of
Mm,
not being a decision maker of government. So, and I do feel still very blessed and honoured to be the local member for Arnhem. And the trips that I do, predominantly my electorate is remote Territorians and remote towns, communities and homelands. But randomly, since 2020, I've also represented Tyndall RAF base, which is just outside of Catherine, like
yeah,
multi-million-dollar works happening in Tyndall with defence. They're the home of like the Lightning jet,
yeah,
fighters, and it's just phenomenally so different to the rest of the electorate. I have one major mining town on Good Island as well that I represent, which is comes with different set of challenges. And in the first term, I had Kakadu and Jabiru as part of the Arnhem electorate before they changed the boundary
wow,
redistribution in 2020. So I learnt a lot about Jabiru and Kakadu, and then in the transition out of the mine there. So at one point, I represented two of the larger mines in the top end as local member. So in terms of the work I do as local member, for me, I said, when I sort of compare, not judge, but compare some of the work that's advocated for from, urban seats. Here in my electorate, people believe things when they see it. So, concrete things you can see and touch to show that you've been working hard to get something. So housing, remote housing has been one of the most rewarding deliveries as a local member to be a part of and advocating for. And not always like necessarily a brand new house. It could be a driveway being added to a house because people are trudging through mud in the wet season. They don't like, there's no concrete from the road into their house. And getting concrete driveways put in, just going,
Yeah.
hey, why are we building all these great new houses and not putting an entryway where people are then like old people, young people, everyone in between can access their home without trudging through water, mud, dirt,
Yep.
etc. So things like that. I've been able to deliver sections of sealed road across two of the main roads in my electorate on the Roper Highway as well as the Central Arnhem Road, and they've been huge game changers, especially there's two small communities in my electorate called Bulman and Uibo. If anyone knows the territory, it's about sort of 3-4 hours drive from here in Catherine up the Central Arnhem Road towards Nhulunbuy. And there was a really horrible entry into the community, very heavily trafficked between the two communities, which are about 5Ks. And one of my election commitments was to seal that's 5Ks of road from the Bulman community back to the Bulman airstrip because of road safety. When accidents happen, it's very dangerous to then transport someone to the airstrip from the health. Took 5 years for the 5 kilometers to be sealed. So if I hadn't have won in 2020, then whoever had come in after me would have been able to get the claim. I said, oh, it's all right. I'm still going to go out there and kiss that bitumen when it's sealed. So I did. But luckily I won and I was able to be the
Right.
local member who delivered that. And then I got 30 kilometers of road from two sections of bridges going to my largest community, which is Nooka community. And just the difference in safety, road safety, wear and tear on people's vehicles, road access in the wet, a huge and phenomenal difference. Probably won't mean much to people who don't go out there and don't travel out there, whether that's for work or for family. But for everyone who does travel on those two sections of road, like phenomenal difference. I feel very blessed to have, some things that I can point to say I got that done as local member and I advocated and supported what community wanted for that. So those sort of tangible things. Of course, there's other great policies that we've been able to support formally in government, but I think people at Bush particularly will believe you when they can see something has changed for the better, and some of those developments and being able to support, grants that then provide, sport and rec or aged care with better facilities, whether it's local government and being able to support those, oval lights for some of our
Yeah.
communities, big massive sporting lights have been able to deliver in 3 communities so they can do, nighttime sports, have competitions. They're things that I can hang my hat on and be very proud of, because at the end of the day, whenever this job finishes, a lot of the people in those communities I am related to. So it's not like I'm going anywhere. My family's not going anywhere. But I always approach the job as local member as thinking I want to be able to step out of this job, or whether I get kicked out of it, whatever happens, hopefully it's the first one, that I can look my family in the eye and say that, I did the best possible job that I could when I was
Yeah.
in this role. So that's always kind of at the forefront of my mind.
I'm not surprised. That's an additional kind of high bar, isn't it, in terms of expectation, when you've got so many family living in the electorate. And it goes to show about the tangible, whether it's remote housing or lights on ovals. All politics is local.
Mm.
Just always all politics is local. Um, so we talked about you being the member. What about, I mean, I don't want this to be an unfair question because you've been the leader of the opposition for a year, or a tad under, really, in theory. How have you found that role in that time? Like, you've been in government, now you're in the opposition, you're the leader of the opposition. Like, how has that been a change in mindset for you, and what are you setting about to try to achieve in that role as well?
Yeah, it was quite difficult with the transition out of government and into opposition at the end of last year, 2024. And mostly the sadness and the hurt was around, well, one, we went from a team of 14 to 4. So losing 10 colleagues and only having 4 of us who are all Bush members, representing, very large electorates, be the 4 Labor opposition members. So that was tough, but also seeing, some of the untangible changes that the new government brought in, a lot around justice, law and order, with their promises that they made in the election, but seeing a lot of the undoing of processes or mechanisms or policies that our Labor team had spent years sort of either progressing or moving forward to try and get some of the systemic and long-term change in the Northern Territory just literally swiped away in kind of, a 2-week period of a parliament sitting. So that was probably the most hurtful part of becoming opposition, and seeing so much hard work over years literally just, struck out in a short period of time. The other sort of difficulty and challenge was around, I guess, bearing the load of the things that people wanted to raise with us in opposition, not having the power necessarily to do anything other than voice and support and advocate. And in some instances, we'd even sort of get to the point where we'd say, if it's going to come from us, it's going to be more detrimental to you and your organisation. So these are the ways you can advocate, or these are the people you should be, hassling, essentially, whichever minister or local member in the government, and we can come in and support behind, but knowing that there's a balance between supporting, but then also being, I guess, the blocker for people. So that was really difficult to kind of to stomach in a way, because I try and still be glass half full person, and believe that if you're entering politics, that it should be in a way that everyone is there for whatever reason, but ultimately the reason should be to leave the Territory in a better place than you left it. And just feeling like a lot of that was being really regressive, and still is now, unfortunately, it's probably been the toughest part. But the silver lining, and I do say I like the glass half full person, is the learning opportunity. So when people are like, oh, how are you going opposition? I'm like, actually, we're okay now. It was that sort of 6 months of really tough, trying to get used to the changes. And I think I felt like our team hit our stride in May this year, which was the Territory government's first budget since the election. And they didn't have a lot of great stories for the Territory. There weren't a lot of good things coming out around the changes that they made, which they promised Territorians would make a difference. And so going, okay, like, we can do this for the next couple of years, hold them to account, ask the questions, support people who want to advocate against or for something for whatever reason, with the government, and be, a strong facilitator in that sense, but also hold true to our values around particularly education and equality, which I think are key principles for the Labor Party. And then the chance to reinvigorate the ALP here in the NT, our membership. I think also the federal election win really boosted us. Not to be arrogant in any way, shape, or form, because I think that's what people hate. Everyday Territorians, or Australians, hate arrogance and the nastiness of politics. So I think just getting grounded again in that sense to go, all right, if we've hit rock bottom, the only way is to build up. And then the learning around the strategy of opposition is very different to government. So that's kept me on my toes. So I still feel like, even though I've been a member of Parliament nearly 9 years, that I've still got things to learn. And I've been very open with people, particularly now as leader of the opposition of the Northern Territory, ALP, is that, I'm learning in this role, and I don't pretend or profess to know everything. So I'm just trying to, keep myself immersed in that. The positiveness of learning and the great support that I have around me also makes a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a big change, and 14 to 4 is a significant change. In addition, but learning that mindset, it's something that change in mindset, government now opposition, equally opposition to government. It's takes time, and I think the more that our alumni hear about, well, it changes, but then I adapt and it's hard, and then I feel in control of it again. So the more that message gets through, then I think the better, and the less barriers that we see for women entering politics in the first place. And look, I've got one more question, then I'm going to throw it to questions in the chat or getting people taking off mic. But it's not meant to be a softball question either, Selena, but I guess it's it's noting that, there's local government elections in the NT. It's in a week and a half, I think, election day. And there's a number of our alumni that are running in that election, but there's women and men across the territory as well. But you have experience in the territory chamber, you have experience in government and opposition now. Why is it important to you that we always make sure that there is a strong pipeline of diverse experience and diverse voices entering politics and ultimately getting elected? How have you seen that have an impact in conversations?
Thanks, Lucia. It's interesting because I feel so blessed to have just seen women in politics in the Northern Territory since I was young, since I took an interest in politics. So our first chief minister, who was a Labor chief minister that was female, was Claire Martin, and she was elected in 2001, which was the year I was in year 11 and my second year of doing youth parliament. So people in the government, there were female women, there were Black female politicians like Mullendere McCarthy, who's now our federal minister for Indigenous Australians, Marion Scrimgeour, who is now our federal member for the Northern Territory for Lingiari. So at that sort of age of recognition and where I could kind of say, oh yeah, like I kind of understand what government is from a teenager's perspective at the time. Seeing women in government and then seeing Black women in government as well, for me was not even a thought of, oh, could I be a politician in all the territories? Like, yeah, well, this is what we have. This is just part of our normal process and cycle of government. So not to simplify it, because I know the women before always have a very difficult pathway to blaze to then lead the path a lot more stable for those of us coming in behind them. So not to diminish or to simplify their journeys, but to say this, I was able to, to see, if you can't be what you can't see. That's this great education philosophy. And I was able to see all of that from being a young teenager in the Northern Territory as a possibility if it was something I chose. And I always joke that I got into politics for about 10 or 15 years earlier than what I had mentally thought that might be my journey. But again, another great saying in politics is that it's all about timing, and the timing was right for me at the time. And feel honoured to have been supported by people in that journey. But I think NT local government elections, the early voting started yesterday. So I voted yesterday, 2 weeks in, and then next Saturday will be the final date. And we're seeing a lot more women putting up their hand in local government. Probably not as many women in remote communities. We still have some pockets where there's some really strong female leadership. There's a few areas where it would be great to see almost a balance if there's two councillor positions, to kind of see, more women also putting their hand up. But, there's opportunities in local government, obviously territory government and federal government, and the numbers get kind of smaller each time. There's a lot of regional and town councils in the territory and 2 city councils here. There is 25 seats in the Northern Territory's Parliament, so there's always going to be 25 members at some point. At one stage in one of the terms, I think it was 12 of the 25 seats were females, and then our cabinet, we had at one point 6 of the 9 ministers were women.
Yeah.
I think leading in the country, the first in the country to have that number. And then you go to the federal seats, there's 4, and we have 3 women out of the 4 representing the Northern Territory federally. So, there's opportunities for women because of those trailblazers, and because people have seen their candidates, they get to know their candidates, and boiling down to it, like the territory, I always believe, is around relationships. So you're building relationship with people, even if they're not necessarily your political colours. You know, I always say, like, I've got quite a conservative pocket south of Catherine that I represent in the electorate, but you know, I know people, you know, they know they can access me and talk with me.
Yeah,
And I always
terrific.
say, well, even if they're not going to vote for me, they're not going to rubbish me, because it's all about the relationship that you have with people and trying to make, you know, sometimes the way that your path is that you want to make something better may be different, but ultimately that goal is still to make things better. So I still like to think the best of people, and I don't mean to sound naive in that sense, but if you didn't, it'd just be too depressing. And
I don't think it's
why would you then
naive at
encourage
all.
people? Yeah, why would you then
Not
encourage
naive.
people to put yourself up? You know, your family are the ones who miss out on the most time. I've got two young children, a 5-year-old daughter, and my son just turned 2 last Monday. So you know, they've only known me as a member of parliament, and it's probably harder now for my daughter because she's sort of more conscious when I'm away. But for the first 10 months she was born, I got to take her literally everywhere with me, to parliament because I had great support, out bush, which is why she
So
is
great.
such a good traveller in the car. And my son as well, for the first 6 months he was a little bit less time out on the road with me before we got him to daycare here in Catherine. So I've been able to have that journey and then hopefully show, you know, gone are the days of it's just old white men who are the parliamentary decision makers of the jurisdictions. We're seeing younger men and women, we're seeing people with young families, we're seeing people from different political backgrounds and interests now starting to put their hand up, especially in the Territories Parliament. We have our first ever Greens member of the Northern Territory Parliament elected last year. We're seeing people of more diverse background and experience enter, particularly Northern Territory level, because that's where I sit. But see people put their hands up because they are really invested in their community, and I think that always has to be the number one priority, is that focus around not what can the community do for me, but what can I do for the community. And it can be quite challenging when community wants something that you represent and your team, your government or your opposition may, you know, may not necessarily prioritize that. So that's also trying to find that balance in the role.
Um, Thank you. More babies in parliament is what I would say generally. Just
Yes.
generally trying to normalize everyday life coming into the parliament. And I'd like to acknowledge Michelle DeShong on the call, who works with Women for Election and co-founder of the Turnstone Collective. We're going to work collectively about how we can help in those remote communities that you mentioned, Selena. So we'll let's leave that to the side for the moment. But we did a training session in Alice Springs 18 months ago, and there were 3 babies on mats in that workshop
Oh, that's
that
awesome.
our attendees brought. And we made a general decision that if every parliamentarian was holding a baby when they had to make key decisions, then maybe those key decisions would have more longevity considered in their mind. So anyway,
Mm.
that's a bit off piste at the moment.